Hi, welcome to City at a Glance. My name is David Young and I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about cycling or bicycling here in the city of Fort Collins, specifically talking about FC Bikes and some of the events and things that have taken place with that recently. As always, we have with us our city manager, Darren Atterbury. Darren, thanks so much for joining us
Thanks,
today.
David. Good to be here.
Also with us today, we have from our traffic engineering office, Joe Olson. Joe, thank you for being here.
Thanks, David. Good to be here.
And with FC Bikes, we have Tessa Grieger. Tessa, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity, David.
Definitely. So just to kick things off, Darren, can you talk a little bit about cycling and bikes here in Fort Collins and how important and integral that is to our community?
Yeah, that'd be great. And thanks for the topic, David. I think it's a really important one in Fort Collins. So when we think about Fort Collins, imagine if bikes weren't part of that brand or part of our community, what a different community it would be. And so that's why I'm excited about the discussion. I can't imagine not talking about bikes in our community, particularly in the planning phases that we're in right now, and so much investment that's gone into our biking culture. I think it's very appropriate that we do this show. So I guess I'll start off with having traveled around the country and actually in a couple of places internationally recently, which we'll talk more about, it seems like as we're comparing Fort Collins to other small and medium-sized U.S. cities, cycling and recreational bicycling differentiates us from so many other communities within this country, and I hope we get to talk a little bit about that. But and Joe and Tessa, I'll start off with saying how thankful I am for your leadership and the way that the two of you partner, because not in every community, it's not, first of all, many communities don't have a bike program the way that we do, and we'll talk more about that, but they also don't have a traffic engineer, traffic operations director that thinks the way that Joe does and your staff, and the way that you collaborate. No doubt in my mind that this community is well served by the work that you two are doing as well, and I'm deeply, deeply thankful for that.
Definitely. So kind of to kick things off, Tessa, can you talk a little bit about FC Bikes for anybody who's not familiar and kind of what that program is and what you do for the city?
Sure. So FC Bikes is the City of Fort Collins dedicated bicycle program. It's a comprehensive bicycle program that's been around in some capacity since the late 1990s. And as Darren said, that's really pretty unique for a city of this size. So FC Bikes is guided currently by our 2014 Bicycle Master Plan, which set the vision of creating a community where people, regardless of age, background, or ability, have a safe and connected network and feel comfortable being able to get out and ride a bike to wherever they want to go. So our program focuses on achieving that vision through a variety of different programs, initiatives, strategies. Some of the big ones that we're really trying to move forward include adult-based education. So we do education for everybody that is learning to ride a bike to people that are expert cyclists. We've also recently launched a bicycle-friendly driver program, and that's been one of our most successful education curriculums where we're actually reaching the motorist community. When you're in a community where people are constantly seeing people traveling around by bike, it's something that everybody is interested in, understanding how to drive more safely around cyclists. And then a couple other big things that we're really focused on, encouragement. So we do big events. We just had our Bike to Work Day event yesterday, which I think we'll talk about here in a minute. Open Streets, which is a newer initiative for the City of Fort Collins. And then really kind of the framework for what we're trying to move forward here is our 2020 Low Stress Network. And that's building on our backbone, which is our multi-use trail system, and creating these safe, comfortable places for people to get out and ride bikes.
Definitely. And none of that would be possible without our infrastructure that enables people to get out and ride their bikes. Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do for the city and kind of how you work with the cycling and FC Bikes with Tessa?
Yeah, absolutely. So traffic operations, we're responsible for the maintenance and operation of the transportation system. We work with Tessa and her group. We work with our engineering department, our streets department to try to maintain the infrastructure that's out there. And then we're also working really hard to implement new infrastructure based on that bike plan that Tessa alluded to. And so, there's a couple things in there. The low stress bike network, which we're trying to take advantage of existing facilities, lower volume streets, lower speed streets, to put in, more and better bike facilities on those streets so that bicyclists have a continuous connected route through town. And so, a good example of that is the Pitkin Low Stress Network, which was just implemented last year, which basically gives people on bicycles a way to go east to west across town, all the way from Taft Hill clear over to LeMay and beyond. And so, one of the big challenges with that is that, all of those low stress streets, they end up having to cross arterials, and it's like it might be low stress when you're on the lazy side street, but then you get to a really busy arterial and you have to get across. And so one of the things that we've been working with Tessa's group on is installing signals or signalized locations for those bikes to get across. And so you're seeing more and more of those locations. Again, on that Pitkin Low Stress Network, there's a new signal on Shields and also a new signal on LeMay. And then we took advantage of some existing pedestrian signals on the other arterials to get people across there. And so hopefully the arterials are becoming less of a barrier for bicyclists to get as they're going around town.
Yeah, definitely. As a cyclist myself, I can attest that those low-stress roads are very helpful and are fantastic for our cyclists to use, definitely. One thing I definitely wanted to touch on was recently the three of you had the opportunity to go to the Netherlands, which is home to Amsterdam, which is definitely one of the cities in the world that's really known for bikes. And I was wondering if you could share with our viewers a little bit about that trip and what you learned over there and what you experienced in that region of the world, which is really kind of braving new ground in some respects when it comes to cycling and bike infrastructure.
Tessa, I think it'd be good for you to talk about the People for Bikes and how that dialogue started, and then also just to add that Mayor Troxel joined us as well, and we were busy that entire time. So I think it'd be helpful to hear the context in which we all went over there.
Sure. So a couple years ago, Fort Collins was selected as one of 10 cities in the country to participate in an initiative or a program called the Big Jump, and this is a program that's coordinated by an organization called People for Bikes, which is a nonprofit organization based out of Boulder, Colorado. And basically what they're doing through this program is working with these 10 cities over the course of 3 years to really try to support their efforts in increasing bicycling and breaking down those barriers to bicycling in a specific part of town. So Fort Collins was the smallest of those 10 communities selected to participate in this program. We're focusing on Northwest Fort Collins and trying to double the amount of bicycling that we're seeing in that part of the community through infrastructure, through programs, through neighborhood events, things like that. Through the Big Jump and through People for Bikes, we've been able to have additional resources provided through mini grants, through study opportunities like this trip to the Netherlands. And so that's how we were able to send 4 representatives from the city of Fort Collins over to the Netherlands for about a week to really learn how they're embracing cycling and kind of how they've gotten to where they are today, starting in the 1960s and the 1970s, to see, what can be applied back home. We were able to travel there with a handful of other cities that are also participating in the Big Jump program, so just having those dialogues with other communities was a really unique aspect as well. So through the study tour, we were able to see and experience a handful of different communities within the Netherlands, some big like Amsterdam and some smaller like 40,000 people suburban communities, and really see how they're embracing cycling and how they're designing their infrastructure and really integrating that with land use and with high frequency transit. And then creating these dedicated cycle networks that are incredibly seamless and intuitive to ride around and to get to the destinations that you'd like to go. So it was a fascinating experience, and I think we had, as a group, a lot of takeaways from that trip. I think the infrastructure is a big one for me. Looking at, like we were talking about, those separated bikeways, and pretty much, every street you're on, you have a separated cycle track, also called protected bike lanes, and that creates this experience and this comfort for people that are traveling around by bike. And once you get to the intersections, that separation continues. So you have protected intersections, you have dedicated bike signals, And it's just, a different experience traveling around by bike. And when you get to your destination, you might have a multi-level parking structure that's for bikes. And it's very easy to be able to, access those destinations by modes other than driving a car. So I think those are some of the big takeaways. And I think, from my perspective, we have a lot of immediate opportunities that we can start to think about some of these concepts and these principles. For example, we're updating our big city plan right now, and that's concurrently looking at our transit master plan, our transportation master plan, as well as our land use plan, and thinking about how can we start to, better integrate some of these principles and designs into that context as well. So
Yeah. How about for you, Joe? What were some of the takeaways for you?
I think the thing that was interesting to me is how ingrained into their culture bicycling is. It's like, they don't talk about, well, are you a cyclist or are you not a cyclist? Everybody is a bicyclist, and they don't think about it. They just think of it as that's how they get around town, right? And then, the other thing that, and Tessa alluded to it a little bit, was the infrastructure in that, somebody made the point that when you go out to go to the grocery store and you're going to drive to the grocery store here, you don't have to get out and wonder whether there's going to be roads to get you to the grocery store. But if you're a bicyclist, you kind of have to think about, is there going to be a way for me to get to the grocery store comfortably? And over there, it's just like it is for driving, right? They don't even think about it. They're able to just hop on their bike and go to the grocery store, and they don't have to question whether there's going to be the infrastructure there or not. And so it's pretty amazing in that regard. I think the other thing that I left with was that in a lot of ways, we're not that far away from that, right? I mean, especially they talked about, the important things in addition to just having infrastructure was, the density and the destinations, and then also the link in with transit for longer trips. Yeah. And when we think about Fort Collins, especially Northwest Fort Collins and around the campus and around downtown and leveraging MAX, we've kind of got those components, and now we just need to work to kind of build in that infrastructure to make that as comfortable for people as we can. So
yeah, definitely. Darren, for yourself, when you were there and kind of with the eye of looking towards Fort Collins and how we can maybe implement or, looking forward to the future of Fort Collins and cycling, what came to mind for you and what did you see that you noted?
It's a great question, and we could probably, all three of us, talk about this for a couple hours. And in fact, if we had the mayor here as well, I think that he's as passionate and intentional as all of us. So I guess, I don't even know where to start other than saying, I was thinking about my role in this experience going over there, and it still stands. And as I looked at it, it's Fort Collins, as Tessa has said, has been recognized as one of the most bike-friendly cities in the United States. I think that the numbers are 6 to 7% of mode split, meaning people who are riding bikes relative to people who are driving, and 6 to 7% or so, maybe even during the peak hours. I'm not sure of the detail of that metric, but it's, and then when you go to a place that, and by the way, that's one of the highest numbers in the United States. Excuse me. And then you go to a place that has mode split of, in the lowest levels, in the 20% range, to 40 to 60%. You think through, so why is that? And Joe's talked about some of those, ingrained in the culture and things like that. And Colorado, obviously, and Fort Collins have other challenges that they may or may not have. But what I think the mayor and I talked a lot about was, so if we are considered a best practice city from a biking standpoint, we're benchmarking against other U.S. cities. There are other cities that, like Amsterdam and Utrecht and Rotterdam and other places that why not that be the standard? So what if we, as community leaders and in our plan, said, 6 to 7% is great from a U.S. standard, but what if in the next 25 years we went to 25% mode split? And it's not to engineer people out of their cars, but at all. It's actually, it's quality of life, it's wellness, it's efficient use of our facilities. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why we might pay attention to these things. So for me, the lens that I had when I went there was really, how do we become more aspirational in terms of our thinking and not just benchmark against those other great cities in the United States that have maybe 6 or 7 or 8%. How do we move that bar? And the Netherlands could very well be an inspiration to that. I don't know that I'm not proclaiming here that our mode split goals are X, but I think it's going to provoke a conversation. And then what I also, and I appreciated hanging out with Joe a little bit there, is, the details matter. The signage matters, the delineation matters, the infrastructure for sure, the culture, those sorts of things, and land use planning matters, right? We heard a lot about big box versus small boutique, and so how do we integrate those sorts of things that are already a big part of our culture? I was deeply inspired, and frankly, from my standpoint, it motivates me to lead and work directly with the mayor and council and the community to try and think bigger about this. And then what I also left with, and I shared this, we had a kind of a debrief, what I shared was, I have such great appreciation for what we've inherited. So the infrastructure that we already have in place, the underpasses, which are over $1 million each, the dedicated bike lanes, like the Power Trail and the Mason Corridor, and the bike locker programs or bike share program, and Max. I mean, Max was a 16-year, $86 million project that now we get to build onto. So I could go on forever, I won't. But I think that coming back, I have a much greater appreciation for what's been built before now, and then how do we leverage that to really do some remarkable planning and then operations. And the key for me in all these discussions, David, is about clarifying our vision, aligning resources to that vision, if that's important, and then building systems in place that ensure that we're progressing and we're continually improving. And that thinking is ideally suited for this conversation, I believe.
Yeah, and that's an exciting vision that you paint, Darren. And I think yesterday we kind of got a little glimpse of it with Bike to Work Day.
That's right.
I noticed the parking lots were empty and the bike racks were full here at the city. Tessa, could you kind of talk a little bit about that, and maybe also some other opportunities and programs for people who might be interested in getting involved in cycling more here in Fort Collins?
So Bike to Work Day is definitely a holiday in Fort Collins. That was one of my first events when I moved here 5 years ago, and I was blown away by the culture and just the level of support for that event. So yesterday was our 31st annual Summer Bike to Work Day event.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible.
Nice.
We had over 65 free breakfast stations around the community, which is the highest yet. And I think the thing that's really unique about that and interesting is that brings together over 165 businesses and organizations throughout the community. And that, to me, is a testament of this culture and of the level of support that goes well beyond the city government to the community and to the business community for advancing cycling here in Fort Collins. So yeah, it was a wonderful event. It was a great day. Some of the key highlights, I would say, we're still kind of pulling together our numbers, but we had over 1,000 visits at one of our stations on Spring Creek Trail and Mason Trail, and I think that's the highest visited station that we've experienced yet. So that's pretty neat.
Was it the food?
I think it's the food. I think it's also more people are getting out and riding.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and the other thing that was pretty interesting to see is more youth participating in this event this year. So we call it Bike to Work Day, but really we think about it in terms of Bike Everywhere Day. And so to see so many families out riding, I think is also a reflection of the work that we're doing to make safer places for people to ride, so they're feeling more comfortable and confident getting out, enjoying these events and these facilities. So yeah, it was a good day.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. This is a great topic, and I think the future of cycling in Fort Collins is certainly bright, and it's exciting to hear about some of the things that are in the works right now. Before we go, Darren, is there anything else that you would care to add?
Yeah, I as I say almost on every one of these shows, what a privilege it is to do this work in this community, to be able to think big and then to be able to align resources to it. And one thing we didn't talk a lot about, David, are all the partners that are non-city partners here. That this is the biggest partner is the community that says we want this vision, we want to do more in this space, and again, not at the expense of the car. It's complementary. It's Joe, the other big part of Joe's job and his team is making sure that when you're driving on our roads that you're safe as well. And so Joe could do, and has done shows on that topic as well. Today we're focusing on bicycling, but what a privilege it is to be part of a community that actually desires this. That's huge. I think, and then the partners over the years have been tremendous, and I could list a lot of different names, but also mayor after mayor after mayor, city council after city council after city council, and their vision around this, and taking that interest from the citizens or the residents of this town, and then resourcing it. I remember one of my first years as city manager, we were going through a budget process, and we had a active debate about bike coordinator position. And I can look back at that and say, wow, what an incredible intentional investment. And look at the work that's been the work that's been done since that time. That was a really critical decision. That was not an easy decision because there's all kinds of other priorities. And again, I guess I'll just say, and I know Joe, I'm so thankful for you and Tessa, but you have a lot of people supporting you and your teams as well. So the way that you partner with the community and the way that you two and your teams collaborate, it's you're having a very direct impact on this topic, and I'm really appreciative. And it was fun to travel with you guys too. So
It was fun.
yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for City at a Glance, and make sure to tune in next time.